Hey, Shweta, thanks a lot for the talk. Um, yeah, I'll start with myself. I'm Amit Upadhyay. I've been programming since quite some time, and I have always faced this problem that programming, or either this is a belief that programming is almost needlessly hard, right? Like the just the stack of abstraction that the first talk that we saw, they're like just too many things. Like consider CSS, right? Like we consider CSS probably the easier thing to learn, right? Like I think CSS is really hard, and what is there's a reason I feel, which is uh, so consider CSS, which has CSS. Probably there was a CSS one because there is CSS two. Then there is three and probably four and probably then we had five, six, seven. I don't know, and I don't really believe we sure we have a lot of minor improvements, but I don't really believe that in 2023 we are doing something which is like you can really say 5 years ago we were not doing. Right? If you look at especially the front end ecosystem, the React, the JavaScript ecosystem is I feel like extremely hard. Like you have to if someone has to get into programming, let's all any of you guys have like a kid, or your dad decides like, I want to get into programming, I've retired, right? Imagine what they have to learn, right? What would be the process to build a simple application? And they'll have to learn, I don't know, HTML. And I don't even know what is the meaning of learning HTML because if you go and learn HTML stuff that you learn, probably you should never use. It's extremely like if you go to the HTML specification, it's extremely long. I don't think anyone has really even learned all the HTML tags that are out there and when to use them. And we just use div and maybe 4 elements. That's a part of the problem, right? Like all of our browsers and all these things are supporting probably 500 tags, and we use three, right? And probably there would be 500 more tags before we are whatever retired. And I have no idea what value are we getting. We're constantly learning and constantly churning, and the end result is uh, it's like no one is good enough also. Like for example, if you're hiring someone, right, it's a huge pain to see, let's say 500 people will apply and they will all say I know React, and you start doing interviews and you realize that probably none of them are using React right. I don't even know if there is a React right. This thing, it's a constantly moving goalpost. I don't know. Like I was talking to a company recently. They recently did a 2 months project where they moved from uh, just React to React plus Next.js. Right? And it was almost 2 months of project because there were a lot of pages involved and there were a lot of, they also architected some CMS. And I believe that business, as a business, they got nothing, no value out of it. I don't think the revenue would have gone up or any such thing. And they are probably not using React server components, but whatever that has come up. You guys have seen the hooks and use effects, which is probably should be used, should not be used. It's all very. So that's how I have seen, right? And probably one of the problems is that in the good old days, for example, Microsoft decided everything, like the Visual Basic. There was a whole framework that like Microsoft has created, and this was brilliant because in 2002 or even before that, you could create all sorts of layout that you wanted and didn't have to learn Flex in 2002 if you're using any native technology, right? I don't think in terms of ability to layout, we have gained anything in HTML that we did not have in 2000 probably, right? That native applications had, right? Frequently using Flash, for example, could layout whatever layout you wanted to create, you could have created in Flash. So because there were companies, there were single, the problem is probably there's too many people. Like JavaScript committee has no idea about what React does. React has no idea what CSS is doing. CSS has no idea what Webpack is doing. And they're all independent parties, independently solving different problems. And it's for all of you guys to sit down and figure out which tool you want to use for each of them, understand the pros and cons of that decision making. All of you are taking different decisions. One big problem of that is that maybe you are all using React, but probably the component written by any one of you, probably will not work. Right? That native applications had, it's constantly moving goalpost. And will not work in the code base of another person, because the set of decisions that you have taken is probably different, right? You've used maybe Next.js, he's not used Next.js, you've used Tailwind, other guy's not using Tailwind, and so on. So I've been seeing, and you guys have seen, right, full stack guys get paid more, right? And yet, so many backend developers will not become a front end developer. Like, this is not just non-programmers cannot learn, even programmers have very hard time learning, right? So this is the kind of the context. So what we decided, realized that for us to solve it, there has to be like a ground up approach. Like the entire stack that was shown in the earlier thing should be designed by, like, say, one team, right? If you do that, you achieve some stuff. Like, for example, we have built, so we are here to tell you that fastn is a programming language, right? So we have created a new programming language. It's also like React, right? It's a framework, right? So it's also like Node, like a web server. So we are basically saying you just use fastn. Don't worry about all sorts of different solutions that you're using. And so before I go forward, like it started from a totally different place. We did not set out to create a language. We set out to create. So I was building a product, right? So the product was, remixing books. So the idea was, if someone joins my team, they have to learn technology, let's say React, they have to learn JavaScript, they have to learn also probably Linux, Git, PostgreSQL. And obviously, I cannot give you a book on each of those topics and expect you to learn, because that would be this big, this thick a stack. So I thought, why don't I just tear out pages from 5 books that I believe you need to know, and then create hopefully a 50-page, 100-page book that you can learn in a week or so and become productive. And while we can't do it physically, we can totally do it digitally. And that was the idea. I called it laser precision learning, right? Or remixing books. So for that project, I realized this problem. There's no language for authoring web content, right? So that was in 2010. Around 2010, I was building that product. And Markdown had not yet become commonplace. It was there. Sphinx was obviously, restructured text, sorry, was obviously slightly better, more popular. And there were a bunch of other tools like ASCII doc and LaTeX. In fact, actually at that time, we chose LaTeX, right? So if you think about authoring books, if you think about authoring web content, if you think about this page, right? This page is basically a web content. Now, what is the language you use to author web content, right? So that was the other problem. On one hand, like programming is too hard. On the other hand, is like there's no language for authoring web content, right? And I was like, if you're talking about languages for authoring web content, I'll tell you a fun story. So LaTeX has very weird versioning system. So one of the first versions that came out in LaTeX was called version 3. And then the next version was 3.1. And the next version was 3.14 and 3.141. So basically the guy, Nut, who created LaTeX, he was like following pi, right? So every release of the LaTeX was one next digit of the pi, right? And he basically said that the day I die, right, the version, one more release would be created, and that would be exactly equal to pi. So the important point here is that he cared about stability, right? The most important thing is if you're talking about authoring books, right? Like we are reading books written probably hundreds of years back and so on. If you look at the internet, imagine if you've written anything 10 years ago, is this surviving? Is that present? Like, can you go back and revive that website? If you created a website like this 10 years ago, do you think you can just bring it back? Like this, like technology is like totally creating this whole memory vacuum where at the end of it, you'll probably not find anything you've done in last 10 years, right? Because whatever hard disk, whatever SaaS company, whatever software you use probably would just stop getting maintained, bought out, sold, and discontinued. And all the content will just kind of die along with that, right? So they were like, Blogspot, is it still there? Think about that. huge amount of how much amount of block were written. In fact, there have been a lot of like MySpace, and there was this live journal and so on, right? So there have been so many places where huge amount of content is written, and all the live journal probably, I don't know how long do you think live journal would survive? Is it surviving today? I do not know. Would it survive in 2030, 40? Probably not. So that was the second problem I have been really struggling with starting in 2010, that, there is no language. We use LaTeX. LaTeX is brilliant for some things. It's LaTeX produced output looks really, really pretty, really good. They have a great support for formulas, etc. But LaTeX is extremely hard, right? You just like, I also used Lix, which was derivative of LaTeX, just to make LaTeX easy, right? So LaTeX is really hard. And obviously LaTeX is not web friendly, not web native, right? So we do know that the future is going to be web, right? So all the content LaTeX was designed for generating PDF files, right? So anyways, so this has been my struggle key. Okay, how do we take programming and make it really easy? And also, what is the language for authoring web content for maybe next 100 years, right? That's the. So I'll show you what we have. So consider a website like this, right? So very like a vanilla this thing, right? Now all of you guys can probably build this in React in probably in an afternoon or maybe a day. It's a very simple site. But how do you do that, right? If you do it in React, let's say, where is the content, right? This text that is living, that is here, right? Is this part of your React source code? If you do that, right, you will obviously, maybe people here can easily update the React files and redeploy, but your non-business team, etc., cannot, right? So you'll be like stuck with that task. Hey, CEO will come in saying, I'm going to have a meeting. I've just changed this line. Go and update this, right? And no developer would probably want to do that. And so anyways, so I was talking about the authoring language, and this is what we have come up, right? So now if you look at this, right? So this syntax, so we started with Markdown, right? So we thought that, Markdown is pretty great, but the unfortunate fact with Markdown is that it is too simple, right? So Markdown is only composed of headings and paragraphs, etc. And you cannot basically realistically conceive that you will be creating this page with Markdown, right? So we have tools like solutions like MDX. You might have heard, I think you just put React code in Markdown file, but effectively it's like putting HTML code in Markdown file. It's like it is slightly better, and it turns out not to be really still better unless you really design for it. Let's say, for example, if you look at Dogosaurus, it's just a random code, and I'm comparing us with, right? Like so. So this is your source code of Dogosaurus, and this is the source code of a typical React file, right? Like this is what I'm saying. This compared to that, this is the source code, right? So one important thing here is key. The first problem where programming is actually really hard and so on. I believe we have reasonably solved because this language, when I tell people, this is, in fact, if you see my title, it's actually called DSL. A lot of people even object when I call ourselves a programming language that this doesn't look like a programming language, just a DSL, which is actually a compliment that we have managed to make it this easy. So this syntax, you see, so we have this dash dash, like you can think of this as a HTML, like greater than ws.page, less than ws.page, right? So It's like HTML you can think of, like so tiny thing. But this is really, so what we have really set out to do is to create the minimum number of like syntactical thing that you can have, right? So, so, so this is something that a non-developer, right, can learn in like in an afternoon, right? In a not in an afternoon, like you just like you see you start copy pasting, like you're not expecting these guys to create these components, right? So this component hero with image already exists, so therefore it's actually really easy. So because this is the component, right? So that section that you see is the source code of this what is on your screen, right? The next section, build the next generation, is here, right? So all of these are ready-made components that you are invoking to create the content, right? So so this is the first part of this thing. We have created a language which is, in fact, actually, if you only want to learn this part of it, you can learn in an hour or two. If you want to learn the whole thing, we'll get to that. That a programmer can learn in a week. Non-programmer can learn in maybe 2 weeks. So we have the person who has taken the most amount of talks about fastn is a guy in Kerala who was a designer till Feb this year. And he met us, and in 1 month, he took 3 sessions in colleges teaching fastn to people, right? So that's what we are saying. So we are talking about something which is extremely easy, as you'll see. So the syntax is really easy, as you see. Right. So the next thing I wanted to show, right? So there are a lot of examples here. Let's say you can create a lot of these. We actually are what we are doing is we are creating hopefully a lot of ready-made components. So when you're starting, you can now while we are doing this. Right, so there was this other thing that has happened that happens, right? So if you are, let's say, let's go back to the same repo. And let's look at this pull request to add a component, right? So this is a journey of someone adding. I have no idea what is going on. Okay, I'll do one thing. I'll wait for the internet to come back, and I'll make this point later on. So while simplicity was a very strong goal for us, right? I want to talk about other thing which is really hard, and which is basically data-driven UI, right? So what all UI that you see is data-driven, right? You want it to be data-driven, and earlier the point was made that making things more declarative obviously is the right direction. So React has taken really a good step from jQuery to make things declarative. Um, it's not gone far enough ahead, right? So let's look at some code and we will understand stuff. So this is code portion of the talk. So as you see, this is the universal, like in fastn, most of the syntax has these elements, dash dash, something, colon. So here we are defining an integer. We are actually, if we contrast these two statements, especially in the declaration part, this guy, or if you define an integer without dollar, it basically means I'm defining a non-mutable integer, right? Whereas if you're defining it with dollar, it is mutable. So we have come a long way by adopting TypeScript, right? And I think it makes the code better, type, etc. is really a good thing. But if you have been following, let's say, functional programming or Rust, etc. Right? So there's a lot of emphasis given on knowing the mutability, right? Whether something is knowing the type. Earlier, people used to not care about what is the type of X, and that was just let X is equal to 10. People at least got whatever woken up and they realized keep saying X is integer is a good step. But the logical next step is obviously also to tell you that X is mutable. Because if X is not mutable, you know you don't have to debug X. You know that like the whole sort of bugs that can happen will go away if you know for sure that this variable is mutable or non-mutable. In fact, when we are calling a function, right? So for example, in this case, we are calling a function, and the syntax basically, I don't have so if you look at these two syntaxes, in this case, I'm calling a function, and in this case, also I'm calling a function. And in this case, I'm passing a equal to dollar something, and here I'm passing $C is equal to dollar something. So what it means is this variable is passed as a mutable reference. So I have passed a mutable reference to counters, right, to this function. So the add counter function can choose to mutate this variable. So I'm very aware upfront which portion. So I know for sure that this double cannot do anything with this count. This count will not be modified by it, and so on. So these are, if you use Rust, you'll be totally familiar with these kind of concepts. We have just tweaked the syntax. That's, by the way, that's the philosophy with which we are designing. We are looking at something which can be learned by, let's say, school kid. Right now, for example, there's an event happening in Delhi where there's a guy called Krish. He is 10th standard student who has just learned fastn maybe two weeks or 3 weeks back, and taking a session teaching fastn in a college right now. So that's what we're talking about. Like a 10th standard student can learn our language in a week, right? That's from scratch. He did have a lot of programming experience. He knew React, but we have tried it with others as well, people who have designer and stuff who have never learned any past programming, this thing. So while we are making it extremely easy, we are not dumbing down anything. It's actually doing stuff which we want to be able to say React and TypeScript, etc., cannot do right now. Obviously, we are very 0.3 is current version number that we have. 0.4 is what we have. So things are alpha. Things need your support in terms of reporting bugs, etc. But what we are saying is this is a significantly React was significantly better than jQuery. It was not just an iteration over jQuery. It was a declarative approach is significantly better. Similarly, TypeScript was significantly better than JavaScript because type is good. So we are talking about a logical next step for this kind of stuff. So few of the things that you will see here. So here we have defined these variables, right? So one of the strong thing that we have taken is it's almost like React also tried to take it, and maybe we'll also have to do escape hatch, is that you do not get direct access to DOM, right? So you have like so we are also saying that you actually only mutate data, and the DOM automatically gets updated. So you are only working with data, and the UI is kind of transparently like. So if you look at this line, for example, right? So here we have two variables, X and Y, both of them mutable, so they can change during the page after the page has loaded. And we are defining this guy sum as a sum of these two things. As you see, there's nothing funny here. Like I have not used what do you call use state or any like it's just natively I have declared some variables. And this add very soon, this is the body of the add. Actually, we will soon allow you to write this add as an inline thing. We would have loved to write a syntax which is just curly bracket a plus b, sorry, x plus y, but we've not yet. So that's the part that a lot of things are still in work in progress. I'm not necessarily saying start using in production, but you can for a bunch of things. So here the variable sum is actually a formula, right? So because you cannot mutate it, it's not mutable, and obviously you declared it as this, right? So this is close to I don't know how many of you guys know Excel is an immutable programming language. Excel is a declarative programming language, right? If you define a formula in Excel, it automatically, let's say if it says sum of a column and you modify any value in that column, obviously you expect the sum to also get updated. And these things happen. And that's what you're seeing, right? If you see this, this is a formula statement. And you're saying the sum must get updated. And let's say I'm using this sum over here, right? And it will just, the UI will just keep on getting updated. So let's understand this step by step. So I've declared two variables, right? X and Y. And I've also declared a list, right? And this list is called counters and also is mutable list. And this list contains 4 elements, right? When the page is initialized. The first is 1, then X, Y, and then 42, right? And so far this should be hopefully nothing very hard. Now I'm building UI. So this is another thing that you are just using the same syntax. You're not switching from HTML, CSS, JavaScript in the same file. We have spacing. Somebody was, by the way, mentioning React, the first talk. I forgot the guy's name. Ekansh, yeah. So Ekansh made a good point, keep padding. If you say padding something, you don't know it's PX or REM or whatever. So that's like, so we are strongly typed and everything is typed, right? So all the CSS properties are typed. So what we have done is we have taken a decision, we've gone through CSS and we are saying you don't learn CSS, you learn a very tiny subset of CSS that we have like modeled for you. So we are basically saying leave it to us to learn all the new CSS that are coming up and browser maturity, etc. We'll look at it and we'll hopefully add them a new feature. But this is really tiny. All of them are listed in one small page. You can scroll and maybe in an hour you can just finish even manually typing out all the examples and you're done. Right? So all the page that you can think of can be created using these, a very tiny subset of CSS. We also have stuff which is like, this is fixed as against responsive, right? So it can be made. So what we have also done is like, so our philosophy is to solve all the problems for you. So for example, when you're setting a variable of like say padding or something, you probably want to change that depending on device, let's say mobile and desktop, you don't want to use a single value. So we do allow you to do that. You can, another thing is like dark mode, for example, you probably want to change based on dark mode. And you don't want to put a bunch of if conditions and either you do that or you lay out your DOM in a very specific way and play with the probably you attach a class to the body, right? To switch from dark to light mode. That you do that. That's a very fragile setup, right? So for example, if you have 4 color schemes, let's say, I think let's not go there. That's too far ahead. What I'm trying to say is we are looking at that. Like I'm looking at your code. I'm looking at what can compiler do. Like obviously at the end of the day, I'm generating some JavaScript code. So I'm thinking, what is your intention? And can I write some code which is like following your intention and just magically do it in the most efficient way, right? So at some point, I want to be able to say not only it's extremely simple to learn, etc., and obviously not more concise than React, it's going to be actually faster than React because we are doing it not expecting you to follow the right good practices. That's the main thing. That's how I'm saying ki a person who never programmed can learn in a week faster and become productive is because we are doing everything. The compiler is doing everything. It is generating the code that you guys would have recommended, oh, you should write this code. Whereas the input, the UX for the developer is they just write what they think they should be writing. We have decided, right? So that's the advantage you get by the, I think the Svelte is the right approach. If you look at the use effect and all the stuff, I think Svelte definitely has done slightly better, but I feel like they have kind of really not gone all the way because they have compiler, but they're a compiler only for their subset language. They're not compiler for the entire JavaScript. So their compiler doesn't understand the entire variable journey. Like for example, if your variable is bound to a function and function takes some arguments and and so on. It often, if you go to the latest thing that Svelte has launched, I think I forgot the Tide, Rive, I don't know, Rope. So they are trying to do Rune, exactly. If you read the Rune blog, there are so many examples which should have worked, right? So Svelte, and I feel like they're trying to do it, and they're trying to solve the same problem, and we are also trying to solve the same problem. They somehow did like very poor job. Like for example, all of these things, like so Svelte like advertises that this just works. This looks brilliant. You see this code. There's nothing fancy here. You just write count as an integer. You incrementing the count, and UI is reacting, right? So it's exactly the same as us, right? It sounds like that, right? But when you start looking at any of the complexity, they took a step back and they started telling you to write code like this, which I think is obviously a step in the wrong direction. And they're talking about these kind of stuff, right? Like consider this, right? So this is very much similar to what we have done when we are defining sum, right? We are trying to define a formula, but they have to use this special syntax, right? And even if you use the special syntax, it fails because you see over here. So this is what I was saying. They are not really parsing JavaScript fully. They are not following this function call to figure out, okay, inside this function there is also height, right? So they're writing a very dumb parser. So their parser only understands area is dependent on width, that not that area is also dependent on height, right? So because they're not really written a proper parser of JavaScript. JavaScript is a extremely hard language in the sense if you're writing a parser for it and trying to understand, if you want to follow, okay, this variable depends on that variable. If you guys, anyone ever wants to write a code which tells you, okay, this variable depends on those stuff, it would be a really hard thing. You guys must remember prototype, you must remember prototype inheritance at one point used to be the thing. Now there's protocol, there are a lot of stuff. And that's the problem that Svelte is actually facing. Right? They are trying to say, hey, just use React, JavaScript, but they have to then suddenly parse the JavaScript, understand the JavaScript, and they have given up on that, and they are saying, okay, now you use these funky stuff, and they put all the correctness headache on you, right? Okay, their Svelte compiler cannot do all those stuff. You have to write the code correctly for it to work. Whereas we, taking the other way approach, we are saying, you learn my language. It's a very small language. But my compiler fully understands. So inside this function, if you're depending on some other function, let's say this function could have internally called some other function, which might have depended on some other variables, etc. So all of these things just work because we are doing a proper compiler approach, and instead of just a, anyways, yes. So we'll just, so here, so in order to understand, so we have these components. These are called kernel components, right? So you're looking at ftd.column, which is you can do it with Flex. You have to do some direction and other stuff. That's again, how do we make it very easy? So column, top to bottom things are come, row left to right, and so on. And we have text. Obviously, this is the point I was going to say, but I think we don't have time to discuss that yet. Here we have created this, we have invoked this counter, right? So counter is a component that we have created. So if you look at MDX, like the definition of the component goes to a JavaScript or TSX file, whereas in MDX file, you only write the whatever. So here we are saying it's the same language in which you define the component and use the component. So this component takes this, these are like properties of this guy. There's a dollar count, so obviously it means it is mutable. This value changes. We need an index. I'll show you why. And we are showing you again the formula aspect that this can also work on this. Right? So and we have built the UI. The UI is, let's look at this once again. Okay. So what we are binding everything to is like we have taken the 10 and 23. So 10 and 23 are the x and y variables, and 1 and 42 are these, right? And we are looping over it. So we are looping over this list and creating that many counters, right? So you have done that. And so this kind of, obviously it's working. So if you look at this, we also have like the color, right? You see it's kind of conditionally changing. So the background solid is yellow if this condition is met, right? So, and again, it's purely declarative. It's really, hopefully, really clean. And yeah, so we are using the index to delete it. Let's say if this is our, right, you can delete. So if you noticed, uh, again, this list now doesn't have one, right? So one is gone. This guy I have just deleted. Now this list has only 3 elements, the 10, 23, and 42. And these two guys are other variables, right? So as you see, I looped over the list, right? So it's actually a single variable. So this variable is both a local variable and like if you would have done it in JavaScript, let's say declare an integer and added it to a list, you would have actually 2 copies of that integer. And if you mutate the variable, the list will not get mutated. Similarly, if you modify the list, the variable will not get mutated, right? So here we are basically saying, we are basically saying, let's do the right thing, right? Because this is what you have done. And sometimes you do want to create a separate thing, right? So for that, we have actually figured out, created this syntax as well. So here, for example, if you pass by $x, meaning that you're passing the reference to the same thing. But if you say star $x, it's actually a copy of this. So this counter, right? So I have a counter on the list, right? And also a counter on X and Y individually, right? So both of them are tracking the right data. So this is X, right? So this is modifying X to 11, 12, and so on. You can see the value of X. And also this is the counter on which is explicitly added on X itself, right? So then it kind of just works and does the right thing. That's basically what we are saying. You can create a very complicated object hierarchy, like you could have created list containing list, and you're modifying it, and it kind of just does the right thing. So yeah, so this is fastn. We're trying to make programming really easy. Fastn code is something that your team can edit, not just you. Right? So if you're ever building a website or landing page, probably you should build it in fastn. It's not a good idea to build it in React because then you have to constantly npm package update. You have to keep on doing and so on. Like if you work with, let's say, any unicorn company, they probably are up since 10 years, and you probably don't want to maintain a React code for 10 years or any long period of time. So that's where we kind of come in. We are giving you, we committed to stability. So anything which works in 0.3 works in 0.4 and so forth. And we are solving some really hard problems, hopefully. Any questions?